Welcome or bienvenue. Welcome to Property Quorum, a place where property professionals and one silly man in a hat discuss things that could change the way we view the property market or the way in which it works. And today is no exception. We're delving into something which I wish we had our tame property lawyer with us. Julia, I know she's in between cases and so on. If she can pop in, she will. But this is really something that would be right up her street. This is called When Regulation Loses Its Way. Goodness. And of course, to start us off, as is traditional, Hamish McClay.
One of the things that came across on Monday of this week with attending a conference, at which point the presently absent Juliet was actually she was speaking, as was, I should say, one other sort of property lawyer. And basically between them, what you can actually sort of see, the type of work which they do and that which they can be held responsible for not working out is really quite significant. Now, I've got sort of something like, when I look and my sort of vision, I've got about 60 degrees. That's about as good as I get. Now, these property lawyers, they need 360 degrees, 360, probably 540 on occasions, because there is just so much information out there that they could access. And the trouble is, they don't have the same excuse that the likes of I have in my simplistic little 60-degree world. They are meant to be responsible for everything. And the fact that there happened to be some chemical under the ground which wasn't terribly beneficial, which didn't come up in any reports they asked about, the only answer they will get when the claim comes forward is, you didn't ask for the proper report. Now,
well, so you carry on, Hamish, please.
No, I was wanting to sort of say, now, this is where we're speaking about a particular sort of case this morning. I'll let Silas sort of enlarge upon that one, where a situation was actually brought to court, and it was totally irrelevant what the objections actually sort of were, and there's no reason why it should have got to that particular sort of stage. But we hear this so often. There's so many things they get to tribunal, but it's the reputation of the people that are brought to that tribunal is forever lost. I mean, once it sort of happens, even though the tribunal will find out to their advantage, their name comes up within that particular it is a particular tribunal that people will speak about. And very often people don't necessarily need to know the outcome. They're not interested. Oh, she was taken before a tribunal. And that's the end of it as far as they're concerned. And of course, that does make a difference to the reputation.
Silas, welcome to the show. In a regulated forum, which of course the solicitors are, in this particular case, the SRA, the solicitors regulating body, brought this lady to book effectively, or tried to, and it was later shown that it was completely irrelevant. I mean, but it still lies on the statute books that she was under suspicion. Doesn't that then cast a pall over everything she tries to do in the future?
Well, it would certainly seem that way, Gareth. I mean, when you read the sort of outrage that followed from this particular case, that somebody of a 39-year standing, impeccable record in her particular field, it was then brought before a very serious matter of this particular regulatory body, and all the accusations that then get thrown at somebody, that, as Hamish has rightly pointed out, and as you've said, Gareth, creates a lasting impact on the mental, emotional well-being of the individual, and what potential career options they may have in the future. Now, interestingly, the judges decided to throw this case out at the half-time point. They said there was no case for the solicitor to answer, which is a huge victory for her, and there was compensation paid out, etc., for her trouble, but it's still that social stigma that affects that person. And what particularly bothers me about this case, and again, not knowing all the finer details, but at what point did somebody within that regulatory body go, do you know what, this is a very serious matter that needs the very heaviest handed of approaches taken to it, that one would expect in cases where nobody has been brought to bear. And what I mean by that is there are certain influences where I've seen law firms that have been guilty of quite serious crimes, and the people that have been in those positions of interest or influence have been brought to account. So it does seem as though there was a real mismatch in terms of the heavy-handedness of the approach and what was actually warranted based on all of the facts of the matter.
But you would have thought that the SRA, being a governance body, are made up of both solicitors, ex and current, plus advisors. So they can't be silly people. They must be people of some integrity and intelligence. They must have realized what they were doing, that potentially they were flushing down the sewer the career and the credibility of this lady who, as you led with, had been in good standing for many years. There must have been a point where one of them turned around to each other and said, you realize that if this goes badly, it throws a negative light on the SRA themselves.
Well, one would like to think so, and knowing the amount of time that must have passed in order for that case to be brought, including all the back and forwards between lawyers and preparing case management
months,
files,
right? Months and months of toing and throwing must have been.
And so it begs the question, firstly, one would expect from a regulatory body that you have signed up to be regulated by, firstly, one would expect an element of support in your favor because you have chosen to be regulated and you're working under the confines and the framework of that regulatory body. So firstly, you would expect some elements of support. And the fact that that wasn't given, and then it was, we're going to hold you over the coals come what may, to the point where the judges turned around and said, no case to answer here. And the egg on the face of the SRA in this instance points to perhaps more serious structural problems within the regulatory body itself. Now, whether that's sensitivity of an individual who took a dislike to the person and it was a personal vendetta, I don't know. I'm speculating here, of course. But was it motivated by that as an attack on an individual through the use of a regulatory body, or was it somebody who was incompetent that decided to bring it and ultimately failed in their objective? That bit I don't suppose we'll ever know, but it does bear the question that solicitors having an incredibly high workload to deal with at the moment, and not being rewarded or remunerated enough, in my opinion, then have to look over their shoulder for the £500 gorilla, which is the regulatory body breathing down their neck to say, well, we think you've done wrong, therefore we're going to, you're going to have to feel the weight of this, of a possible legal action against you. I think that is what has caused so much outrage in the industry.
So surely if they took it, then there should be a reverse case to answer, where they have not researched enough to make the case. I know that, for instance, in criminal cases, before it can be taken to court, an expense and the effort and the time and the energy required, there is a certain bar that any criminal case has to answer to make it worthwhile to try and prosecute. So this must have had to go through a similar process. At what point did somebody say, yeah, we've got enough here, she's obviously banged her rights, let's have her? I can't see how that could have happened. As you say, it wasn't even 3/4 of the way through. It was at the halfway point. The judge said, come on.
Yes, nothing to add. And this is the interesting point about the reverse prosecution of somebody who may have done this through a vendetta or something of that nature. For example, if you're accused of a crime, a very serious crime that could affect your reputation as an individual, if that was based on false allegations, there ought to be the ability to sue that person for reputational damage. And whilst there was compensation paid in this instance, I do wonder at what point is the individual or people concerned to be then held to account for bringing this matter in the first place when there was no case to answer. That's a very interesting point.
Well, yes, it just seems that, Hamish, it just seems that potentially, if you have enough of a big stick, then you can hit anyone you like with it without first checking they're a valid target.
Well, I think the validation process is a little bit difficult to understand on occasions. And it's something that in conversations that we've had over time with both Silas and with Juliet, and even with Zara, one of our other sort of property lawyers, who we bring into the conversation an awful lot. There, regulation, anything, if once we start bringing in regulation, it does make the issues very, very complicated. And some items are over-regulated. And of course, we get this toughness. Now, neither Silas or I are sort of legal people, so we can't understand the sort of full depth of that. But we would have thought, well, can we have a conversation about this? But it's not for the first time being outside of this particular one, which of course is, we've got an organisation there representing the lawyers. And lawyers will very often sort of say, well, yeah, we are members of the Law Society, and the Law Society should be looking after us, but is it really? And we have these defining moments. And of course, we had it last year where that vote was brought to bear. It didn't actually come to anything because not enough people voted, but there were, do we have the confidence in the Law Society? And the SRA is an offshoot. I mean, that sort of came into being, I think, sort of around about 2005, 2007. It's a sort of almost a sort of newbie, but it does like to sort of stand up there and sort of say, well, this is what we're going to do. And they're trying to sort of bring in different aspects to law, but it's not restricted to property. We've just, you look at a couple of cases. I remember last week or the week before coming up a particular case to do with the medical industry, where a doctor was struck off after there was a minor aspect which sort of came to bear, and her representative body, and I can't remember what the health one is, but anyway, she was struck off for 5 months. Now here's a doctor who has again totally unblemished sort of record for goodness knows sort of how many years. Now, how many appointments does she have a day with all of her clients? She's struck off for 5 months. She can't advise, help those clients. That's hundreds of appointments that she cannot actually be doing, and the reputation again over a very trivial matter. And one would think, well, can't we just have a conversation? Aren't we adults? Oh no, you've got to bring in regulation. And it will depend who says it. And like Silas says, you don't know. And this is a challenge with the whole thing. You can actually bring in sort of various other conversations as well. What about the West Midlands Police and that situation with them sort of switching off? We cannot have any supporters of this particular sort of football team because of X, Y, and Z. And that information was because of somebody's opinion somebody did not like. But was there any truth in it? Was there any validation in it? There was no regulation there at all. But the guy in charge turned around and said, no, we can't actually sort of go ahead. And another one, which, I mean, this one's a little bit different, because some people like the guy, some people hate the guy. One of those Marmite guys. Tommy Robinson. And his particular sort of attitude. And what he was told, you show that film and we're going to throw you in jail. And what was the film about? Well, it was actually about the rape gangs, as it happened. And it was offering full disclosure. You show that film and what did he do? He showed the film.
Yeah, but the problem was it was subject. I'm not sure. That's a bit more murky because that was sub judice at the time. those particular cases. So he was effectively bypassing the judicial process. So I don't know. It was a bit of six of one, half dozen of the other.
Well, that's what I mean. But they threw him in prison anyway.
Right.
But because of his reputation, because it was said of him that he was a thug, he'd beaten up his wife, he'd done all sorts of things. There were people against him, if you like. It was, if you like, that seemed to be a vendetta. Because next time he comes into the country from going abroad, the police try and arrest him. But I mean, we go on and on and on about all these sort of cases, as that's a bit sort of 50-50, that particular sort of one. But half of the challenge with a number of these particular cases is because somebody doesn't like what they're doing or the way that they're doing it. And regulation is a secondary thing, but they will use the regulation to actually, they think, oh, well, if we say this and do this, we can actually sort of stop that particular sort of person in their tracks. But the sad thing is, to me, there is far too much regulation that it's rather sort of overdone, but it does actually put the pressure onto situations where discussions would actually come to the appropriate sort of results without the need to take it to tribunals, without the incredible cost and the defamation of character which comes as a consequence of those particular sort of cases.
Well, interesting points there, Hamish. I would say that I've just been doing some research behind the scenes, and what's come up is an interesting thing. As we all know, the concept of leasing or leasehold is under review at the moment anyway. There's a quite a pressure to remove it altogether. And so the concept of having a lease has also come under the spotlight. On top of that, in this particular case, a certain leaseholder actually brought a complaint about a certain leasehold. Leaseholders of flat 4 apparently filed a complaint with the SRA, which was later disavowed. But it was the pebble that started the ball rolling down the hill, gathering mud, moss, and everything else, and turned into the juggernaut, which then pushed forward to attempt a conviction against the solicitor who had been involved. So even though by the time the case was brought, the original impetus had been disavowed, they continued anyway. Now, that makes no sense to me. Surely when the very basis of your original complaint has become dishwater, that you discard the rest. But apparently that was the problem. And I think this is a story about internal momentum in large institutions. You've got a supposedly august institution, the SRA. They've had this kernel which has turned into a stone, which has turned into a rock, which has turned to a huge ball of mud rolling at great speed, and they've got no willingness or ability to U-turn.
You know, Gareth, one of the most interesting words I heard in 2025 was the word rigor. I was talking to a gentleman about personal responsibility and personal rigor, and I think society has drifted from a place of being able to speak one's mind, being able to speak openly, being able to speak with the truth, to a point of people have become incredibly sensitive to receiving information that they may not want to hear, or, you know, I must protect my views to the death, even though they may be incorrect. And I think the element of personal rigor is not only to be able to speak freely and speak the truth, but also to be able to receive that and then not want to publicly execute somebody for actually speaking their mind. And that's where I think we're drifting with this whole element of legislation, that if you're part of a governing body, you have to have that personal rigor to enforce that framework efficiently, effectively, and in alignment with the public good. And I think that tends to be overlooked. And it's a massive personal responsibility to be able to stand in that position of responsibility and accountability to say, this is how this should be enforced. And as Hamish said, is that a conversation or is that a full-blown SRA investigation? And that's down to the individual concerned to make that decision based on an accountable action plan. And I just don't think I think that accountability element is being swept under the rug a lot now.
Well, it seems to be to me that we live in a world where if you shout an opinion loud enough, it gathers credibility just by the volume by which you add it. If I stood here and shouted that the world was flat, that the world is in fact balanced on 3 elephants, and we should just buck up and just accept that, and I kept shouting it loud enough, eventually there'll be a small and ever-growing contingent. I mean, this may amuse you. I saw an experiment recently held recently, just before Christmas, held where they took cameras and so on, and a whole bunch of flat earthers to one of the poles, set up the camera to monitor the fact that the sun did not set, even though the day had passed. But it did move in a circle like that, hence illustrating that we must be rotating, and that the world is it anyway. So even to this day, even those founders of that movement went there, they now disavow it and said it must have been a hallucination. I don't know. I find the whole thing distracts me away from the fact that we're supposed to be supporting the rights for people to say things, but we should also be supporting the rights of other people to robustly, with rigor, refute them. Hamish, would you like to take us home, please?
Well, it's one of those sort of strange things, and I love the way that Silas just put. Is it in the public good? Is it in the public interest to pursue this particular sort of matter? And I think we see too often that items are pursued because they just want to pursue them, and they actually sort of think, "Oh, we've got something here," without actually sort of sitting around and discussing it with the right people. That's the big problem, getting the right people. But I think what it does demonstrate is hats off to the legal profession, those who are working in the public, those who are working in the public sort of interest. And this tremendous number, particularly, I mean, we work in the property sector. And of course, that's what we want to actually sort of see. We like those because it doesn't always happen that the person, the conveyancer, is working in the public good. They're very, very often have to, because of the persuasion, they have to work from a financial concept because they're told by providers and all the rest of it, thou shalt do it this way. Now, the big challenge is it's down to regulation again. Where is the line? But it's only through discussion you can find this out, not through tribunal. Tribunal can create case law and all the rest of it, of which you can be argued about for time after time after time. But what we want really is people to work in the public interest without having to turn round through that 360 degrees to check it out and make sure there's not somebody sort of coming for them. Because so many people are working in the public interest, and this kind of situation sort of comes up to them. We want to keep our professionals there and working without this kind of sort of probing going into them totally unnecessarily.
Well, interesting. While you were just summing up there, I did a quick further research on this case, and the interesting point that I'd like to make is the SRA in this particular case was investigator, prosecutor, and gatekeeper of cases in general. That there's no independent judicial filter to make sure that sanity prevails. And as I said, once the ball was rolling, they're just one of these organizations that are built on gentlemen and ladies who come from a particular echelon of the world, and they're unwilling to U-turn. And it just seems sad that we are in that state. We've got a comment from Spencer, a friend of the show. If a regulator can erase a small landlord for persistent failure, when does enforcement become punishment? Kills supply rather than ensures standards. Well, that's a very good point, and one we'll probably discuss in a future show. Thank you so much, Silas, for being here as ever. Sage viewpoints. And Hamish, Thank you for bringing a touch of reality to the show. And to all of you watching, thank you so much for sticking with us. We will have more legal representation, hopefully not flawed, that will attend the show to give us that extra legal viewpoint in future weeks. But until next time, please keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, and please look after that mental health. Until next time, bye-bye.